Hello, everyone. This is second book seminar this semester for KAJAK, and today we are going to discuss Astrida Neimanis' Bodies of Water, Posthuman Feminist Phenomenology, and we have invited today Julia Kuznetski and Ieva Astahovska to discuss the book. Julia is a professor of English at the School of Humanities, and Ieva is an art scholar, critic and curator at Latvian Center for Contemporary Art. And I will give the floor for Ieva and Julia to open the floor for discussion about the book.
Hello, nice to meet you, and I hope that still a few more people will join. And maybe like when Kadri asked me whether I would like to join this seminar or workshop, I was very happy to say yes, because it has been also for me a really inspiring book, and I actually this was a good occasion to read it more thoroughly, because I previously have been reading different essays, which I guess are kind of basis also of this book, which has been published in 2017 in Bloomsbury publishing house, and as in synopsis they say that and also of course the title itself, The Bodies of Water. It is very interesting proposal and analysis by the author, discussing how water is a very essential part of our bodies, and how we are connected with each other through the water. And as she says, water is the element that more than any other ties human beings in the world around them, from the oceans that surround to the water, to us, to the water that makes us up most of our bodies. And she says that our bodies are consisting of 80% of water. And she proposes in her book really new or innovative way, which is part of a larger corpus, which she conceptualizes herself as Posthuman Feminist Phenomenology. Even so, there are some, when I was reading some reviews, and I noticed this intonation that some scholars a little bit doubt that this really is a phenomenon, but she needs to frame it as a part of phenomenological thinking, that as in a way that it extends this approach, how theory can be embodied, and proposes this understanding analysis, how bodies are being fundamentally part of the natural world and not separated from it or privileged to it. And so another also subjective kind of context why it was interesting to also to respond to Kadri's invitation to take part in the seminar was that working at the LCCA, Latvian Center for Contemporary Art, we also are running reading workshops already for 8 years maybe, and we chose also one of, usually these are shorter texts we read in the seminars, or I would not call them seminars, it's more like really discussions as workshops. So we chose to discuss about her essay called Hydrofeminism, or on becoming body of water, exactly at this very confusing moment when pandemics hit us very hard, and everyone was completely confused. You probably remember this period very well, that all the events were stopped, and at some point when we realized that actually this reading clubs could be really good way how we can help each other, in this moment of isolation and not being able to see or meet and connect to each other. And of course, also pandemics, even if it was, we can say it's a human disaster, but but of course, it was also showing very much how everything is connected, and how I could say that arrogance of humans has brought us to this point when the whole world became really paralyzed. And so it seemed, and so the kind of the subject of the seminar or the workshop we chose was, we gave this very general title, Eco-Poetics and Eco-Politics, and this was exactly the reason why we chose Astrida Neimanis as one of the authors, because she really, in a very fascinating way, embodies in her text both this politics and poetics at the same time. And of course, environmental concern is at the very center of her work. And this question about humans' impact on the Earth ecosystem, how it has created dramatic environmental challenges that call us to seek for alternative models, or at least alternative understandings, perspectives, where much more at the center is also very ethical, or the forms of ethics and forms of care and responsibility, and understanding these these relationships, not that it's important to understand them or discuss them, not just as a relationship between people, but also between living and non-living beings or things, between nature and culture, society and environment. And exactly that, there is a lot of written about these issues and problems, but I always came to the understanding that most inspiring reflection lies which proposes more intersectional approach, and brings together different fields, and connects theory, philosophy, art, environmental studies. And this is exactly what we can find in Astrida Neimanis book. And it was really it's really fascinating and probably most kind of resonating for me as a reader, that she's choosing the concept of water, or bodies of water as at the center of her work. She talks about it very kind of concretely, very specifically, and at the same time she is proposing new theoretical frameworks or new theoretical readings of our connections with each other and with environment, and it's exactly also the language itself that she that her work embodies, and or how the language is embodied in her work, and the language how it is filled with what she calls herself traces of endless embodied material practices, and that her own text is she talks about a lot about interconnectedness, but her own text is very much filled with this intertextuality, or it's almost like intertextual net, and in that way developing understandings and sometimes imaginaries that allows us to see things maybe in a different way than we used to think. And as like just short quote, what she also explains, that embodiment from the perspective of our bodies is inseparable from the pressing ecological questions. And this figure, which is on one hand the metaphor, but also very, very concrete materiality, this bodies of water, as she says, it explains or comments that we are all in porous relation with one another and with all other bodies of water. And exactly that there is this moment of eco-poetics, but also eco-politics, which is proposing different kind of politics and different kind of ethics. So this philosophy, ethical concern, and politicality all interconnects in her work. And also, as she says, talking about these bodies of water from the very personal perspective, it like as the synopsis of the book says, that it's connects us from the oceans surrounded to the water that makes our own bodies. And so yeah, this question of language and embodiment, and of course also this perspective, and she refers a lot to different authors, first philosophers, starting with Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Luce Irigaray, and many other feminist thinkers, to the writers like Ursula Le Guin, or also artists, and through this also brings a lot like this, in a way, criticism of the Anthropocene perspective, and it's kind of alienating way of discussing the problems of environment. But also, yeah, this one question she also repeats in several parts of her book, where she quotes Black feminist writer Adrienne Rich, and this quote is that the problem was we did not know whom we mean when we said we. So she always, all the time, is confronting or kind of questioning this this very personal involvement and the planetary scale of ecological, environmental concern, and in that way, she also what resonates with me very much is how she brings in. She doesn't speak much about post-colonialism or post-coloniality, but it is of course also very present in the book, and especially when she also refers to her own surroundings or environment as being raised in Canada, which she, like, also in some interviews, she said that she grew up in a turtle island who is currently known as Canada. So she refers to this indigenous context and knowledge, and of course water is very much part of this indigenous perception of the world, and how in a way it has its own almost like thoughts or intentions, and how this cohabitation between humans and water how can we still think about it also in a, what you could say, contemporary world. Yeah, so it's maybe more like some kind of thoughts in relation to the kind of very general corpus of her book, and then another kind of layer. What I was thinking while reading the book was how she deals with different kind of concepts and contexts, which usually work as framings for us as scholars or artists or art historians. And it's exactly this, what I already mentioned, this the way how she uses language herself, also her attention and her engagement of concepts and meaning concepts, which in a way are coming from this corpus with which we operate, or within which we operate, but at the same time concepts which allow us to get to some sort of new perspectives and new politics and new understandings of ethics or understandings of care. And so probably in this few next minutes, I would kind of focus on these different concepts which are really essential for Neimanis' book. And yeah, and she's been reflecting about this conceptual or idea that what concepts embody herself in the book, and for example, yeah, that she's drawing to the idea that the concepts have the potentiality to generate radical change, and as she says, concepts do not solve problems that events generate for us, but they enable us to surround ourselves with possibilities for being otherwise. And she suggests that concepts are always also material. Concepts and figurations cohabit our world in various companion species, filling various needs and offering different orientations. And I really like this idea that concepts as companion species, that somehow she's not denying this academical framework, even that she proposes new reading of it, but in a way she also in a way kind of opens the meaning towards this embodied perspective, or perspective that also concepts can be material, and concepts also can yeah, be part of living world, where our kind of material world, this approach that concepts can be embodied, and in that way responds to contemporary questions or problems. And I'm very much connected with this her approach that she brings ethics and care at the core of her work, but it also like, and she of course she uses a lot of examples as well, especially in the last chapter of the book, where she talks about very much about this Anthropocene context, but also using examples how much it has been in a way how the surrounding capitalism system, if we could say so, is also exploiting this understanding of Anthropocene. And for example, that this, as she also comments, that the concept of water as tasteless, as a neutral, as something we analyze as a chemical formula. It's also in a way this part of the modern world which kind of brings in this more alienated perspective and of what it is as a substance, and in a way she's bringing it back to this embodied perception, and how how the contemporary knowledge is still related to this indigenous, but of course it brings in also this colonial world. Yeah, and also like still talking about this the different concepts or how she connects them. I think it's really important that she's still kind of operating in the tradition, what she calls mostly this methodology of posthuman phenomenology, feminist posthuman phenomenology, but at the same time she also yeah, she kind of proposes more embodied, more material reading of this concept, and in that sense also this kind of larger field of new materialism is also important part of her thinking or her reflection, meaning that new materialism proposes not as basis kind of this very systems or structural approach or mechanical approach, but more like discussing that the world where we inhabit is based on events comprising material effects of both nature and culture, which are tied together. and together are producing the world and human history. And yeah, and then this again, this feminist posthuman phenomenology, as her writing is positioned. Also, for that, she proposes in a way new perspective or new reading, and so she's quite critical about this classical feminism, saying that and again this question of Adrienne Rich. The problem was that we did not know whom we mean when we said we, and also in terms of feminism is rather skeptical about this. What we would call this classical traditional feminism, which is quite often this voice of the Western white woman who is very much embedded still in this very modernist approach. So what she brings in is this concept of hydrofeminism. Explaining herself that hydrofeminism brings together a feminist sensibility with an ecological one, and that it is very much related with ethics and politics, from the realization that we are mostly made of water, and in that sense refusing the separation between nature and culture, between an environment out there and a human subject in here, and that hydrofeminism also understands the materiality of both bodily and planetary waters as sites of ethics and politics. And again, this very embodied perception of notions. She says that hydrofeminism also means learning from the water, not just like discussing about it or kind of putting different perspectives together, but this learning, this is also some sort of humbleness in her writing as well. She's saying that it brings all kinds of bodies into intimate contact despite and because of our differences. And of course, this is very feminist thought, but it brings in this aspect of new materiality of I would say also this concept of like not concept but like the context of the coloniality, meaning that it's the ways how we can almost like free ourselves from this colonial thinking, this extractivist thinking, or the thinking that the theoretical corpus can tell or teach instead of kind of teaching. She's saying that we can learn from the water. And then from this hydrofeminism, another concept which also becomes very important in her work is this hydro commons, and she's talks a lot about this hydro commons. In a way, we could say a concept, but on the other hand, it's really like again this materiality of our life. That the water should be something that is commons, a communal resource. But as we in so many examples, also she shows that it has been capitalized. It has become part of this even where the same language sometimes which is talking about this commons is actually showing how water is becoming part of this very hierarchical and very unfair system of our world. And then of course, yeah, the very general, this humanist approach itself is the very big part of her work. This acknowledgement that the human is always more than a human, that our relation with all the world from the tiniest details to the planetary scale is not kind of based on or should not be based on the dominance or hierarchical structures, but this interconnectedness is much more sensitive and richer, much more rich than this humanist approach would see. that she describes also her own the book as a post-humanist project, which takes seriously the concern of critical philosophers of race and the coloniality, that posthumanism as a body of work claims to evacuate the concept of the human, but in doing so enacts yet another gesture of Eurocentric transcendentalism. And in that sense, even more, I'm kind of coming from these specific terms and concepts she's using to much more broader, like what posthumanism, of course, is a very large field of contemporary thought in many study fields, but colonialism, coloniality, and I think it's also a very I cannot say fresh, because also a lot of ideas she refers to, she's also referring to different scholars and in a way sometimes criticizing them or critically rereading them, but this aspect that we used to think about coloniality or colonialism as coloniality between humans, or that there has been, like, since 15th century, this colonial politics of European rich countries towards what we would call still global south. But she talks about this coloniality towards nature, and again, not avoiding to make separation between colonialism or violence towards bodies and towards nature, that this question of interconnectedness is very much part of new way of reading contemporary colonialism. And when she talks about water and nature and environment, she talks how much it is being wounded in many ways, and of course it is very much a part of this colonial or so yeah, a little bit kind of messy thoughts, but maybe that was the most important thing I wanted to share. Like, I was kind of reading a bit rhizomatically, and of course also kind of connecting with kind of different works I've been doing, and for whom this reading of Astrida Neimanis has been very inspirational.
No, thank you, Ieva. That was a really good overview and gave us lots to think about it. And maybe Julia, you would like to not respond, but to add on something to you.
Yes, thank you so much for this introduction. Really, this is one of the books that kind of has stood out in the few couple of years. Recently, I actually got to know about this book from Stacey Limo. When I had an interview with her, then she said that she would recommend that book that kind of might align with my research interests, and where the author has used her ideas of transcorporeality, first of all, but has taken them further. So really we can, and then I went into reading that book, and indeed it appears useful. But also there are a few comments or reservations. I don't know, Joonas, if you had the same ideas as reading, but maybe we could add those as well. So indeed, she follows this sort of post-human fashion, I would say, and creates all kinds of fancy terms. First, she lists those that are already out there, like transcorporeality, Stacey Limo's, then nature cultures, amphimixes, co-worlding, so all those she lists, and then to them she adds this hydrofeminism that you mentioned, and also hydrocommons, that we are kind of all together, we are common folk because we all consist of water, which is really fascinating, because indeed we are composed of water, we consume water, and also somewhere in this book she says, she juxtaposes, or she challenges this Western Cartesian model that a lot of Western rationalist thinking is based on, that there is this common sense and we are autonomous bodies that, or subjects, who are able to control ourselves and the world. But then she uses those interesting figures of speech when she says we are not zipped up in ourselves, we are actually porous. Well, porosity, that is also the concept that Alaimo uses. So when we, in moments of stress or extreme emotions, our reaction is first of all water. So I found it fascinating when she brings those examples that, for example, when we see attractive food, we salivate whether we want it or not, or these are the well-known examples. When one sees a lemon, then our body starts reacting even if we don't want it. Then when we are nervous, we can sweat, or when we're ill as well, or when we're lying, this lying test, that our palms start sweating, or if we are attracted to a sexual partner, then also that all goes down to all kinds of liquids that our body sort of gets out of control. And to me, it also links with this feminist idea of abjection, that abject, the Kristeva's idea of this sort of adversive reaction to all kinds of excretions, liquids, that they are sort of taboo topics, that they are not to be discussed, depicted in literature, in decent art, and so on, as it was in the previous centuries. But here, in this kind of philosophy, they are, on the contrary, brought up front. So liquids are sort of absolutely legitimate, they are part of us, or we are liquids, and we are part of this world, fluid. And then it certainly links to the idea of liquid modernity, of Bauman's, this sort of, less rigid frameworks to live by. So that might seem to be kind of liberating. And then she also describes her aim as decentering. She says, decentering the human, that because we also consist of water, just like mammals and fish and bodies of water like lakes and oceans and so on. So our experience or our physical reactions are not unique. They shouldn't be perceived as central, and therefore there shouldn't be this hierarchy that Eva, you also talked about really at length, how everything through that, this hierarchy sort of also dissolves. So this metaphor of dissolution, liquefying, everything being fluid, and in this fluid motion, that is really what she plays around a lot to challenge this Western rational thinking and bring in, as you said, the post-colonial agenda, something more maybe common. She does quote Gayatri Spivak and her planetary theory of planetarity, but really not very much at length. But I also found it interesting how she makes a reference to Carl Zimmer, the biologist who followed or described this Darwin's idea of evolution, how the first species who came out of water and developed legs and then turned into mammals and eventually humans, that this who cannot breathe in water any longer. So water is this interesting element, phenomenon, environment, something that brings us together, but at the same time, as she says, creates a boundary, this elemental boundary that fish cannot breathe in the air and humans and mammals cannot breathe in water. So we are kind of common through water, but at the same time, we are different through that. So this paradox of water, she discusses that also, and I found it also interesting that there is no solution to this issue, that how water brings us together, but at the same time it can be deadly when there are floods. We can also, it's deadly when there is not enough water, when there are droughts. Then water is probably the most toxic, or the most precarious, the most vulnerable to toxicity. So she speaks of toxic liquids coming even from mother's milk. And I've been thinking of that, that fish actually is the most toxic food to eat nowadays. It used to be healthy food, but right now, like it's not recommended. And in the Baltic fish is not kind of considered, Joonas, you will know more, but as far as I've read, that it's even more toxic than the dry land, meat for those who consume it. So anyway, this paradox of water as both giving life, being the origin of life on our planet, and also sort of dangerous, toxic, and killing, that is something to think about, maybe philosophically. And as I've been using these ideas in the analysis of some literary texts, I think in the visual arts and especially in films, water is traditionally this very strong device. Very often there is like rain framing when there are disastrous events, or Tarkovsky uses that. In all kinds of films, there are in many books, the water is also used. So what did I want to say about using that in literary analysis? In connection with the recent pandemic, very often the lungs of a patient who died from COVID, they were compared to the lungs of a drowned person. That's the kind of inside there is this sort of overflowing of the inner liquids. And I've analyzed a book in which the author, it's called The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue, the Canadian writer. And the author speaks about the Spanish flu, the pandemic of the Spanish flu at the beginning of the 20th century. And she published it when COVID started. She didn't mean it like that, but it coincided. And there are so many parallels to the way COVID pandemic was described. So it kind of is very good material. And I wrote an article on that. And there is one episode when a main character, or the main character's friend died, and then or was dying from the flu, and she couldn't cough. She was kind of choking. So she says she was drowning in her inner sea. So that is this metaphor of kind of inner water and at the same time being killing. So that is something that is quite interesting, how this is so multifunctional. And if we think of the way that politics are formed, and also the way things are in the material world, if we think of something closer to home, like the Baltic Sea. I read at some point some years ago that how things are so connected when in Denmark, the laws were introduced about very strict restrictions on animal intensive farming, that they couldn't have too many pigs on one animal farm because that was polluting for the sea, for the environment and so on. So they decided to transform the industrial farms to Poland, but Poland also has an outlet onto the Baltic Sea. So everything kind of comes back. So whenever we want to remove one thing somewhere, because of this watery connection, it still comes back to us. And as this book seminar was announced, there was this catastrophe, act of terrorism with the Nord Stream pipe. So I was also immediately thinking that it kind of so topical that the sea is this, you know, such a precarious thing. And we are here also on its shores as bodies of water, and so vulnerable to all that. So maybe that is too much, but what the point of criticism that I was thinking about is that on the one hand, Ieva said that she brings in this intersectional approach and kind of seems to be in line with the contemporary, you know, it's compulsory to be post-colonial and intersectional and so on. But at the same time, when she speaks about water in gestation, in the bodies that are suckling infants, and there is this milk coming, and that is the most, she says, that is the most intimate thing, and so on, then that is a little bit suspicious, because it appears to me as a sort of essentialist, because to give that as the most explicit example, and of course not, it concerns only half of the population, and of that half, not all have the experience of having this relationship with the infant. So I found a little bit of this feminist or ecofeminist essentialism shining through somehow, although she tried to use some other methods as well, but in many places I don't know if it seemed to me to you like that or not, but in many places she seemed to be somehow sliding into this feminist essentialism. To challenge abjection is good, but to speak of this uniqueness maybe is not, in my opinion. but I think I've spoken too much. Maybe some other readers can also react, and I'm curious to hear what points of criticism you also had, as you teased with this.
Thank you, Julia. This was really good. Well, not that criticism, and I'm being really careful with being critical about this book, because I'm halfway reading it, and maybe in the end she kind of reveals. But one of the sort of like weaknesses from the beginning that was a bit like even annoyed in some places was that like she really emphasized the importance of body of water, or we are 80% of water, and that kind of like really makes us part of everything around us with water. And then in the same time also she uses or uses water in our body as homogeneous, as it is always the same, and even like breastfeeding, for example, is a good example how different it can be, and that we can't treat it homogeneously. And that really sort of like I found it as one of the weaknesses. But in the same time also what fascinates me, and that's maybe a question to two of you or also to others, is how those ideas when she came out with those ideas changed, or how it influenced your field of study. For example, in anthropology, Veronica Strong's work, who she also references, really influenced us as starting to look water not only as material, but also as symbolic, but as also political, and also as part of, and with that also water became a subject in anthropological studies. Also, Stefan Elmreich, who she references several times, has started to really speak about non-human ethnography, bringing in sort of like others into human studies, and through that, I believe her work can be really valuable example of speaking about non-humans in humanities. Why should we speak about natural elements? Why should we speak about animals, plants, if we are trying to analyze humans? So I'm interested, has this book had any influence maybe to your study, but also in general to the field where you are working?
Actually, the book is, I cannot say that it was influencing the project, but it's it really concedes very and kind of creates a very interesting dialogues. Namely, on 1st November, we will open here in Riga exhibition I'm curating. And the exhibition title is The Colonial Ecologies, and it's in a way trying to have this, of course, again, as colonialism, the coloniality, post-colonialism, these concepts are so kind of common, and maybe even are becoming a bit even too general and generally used. But for us, it was making this exhibition. It was really important to revisit this colonial relations of humans with nature, and it's really and of course it's at the end there is no really strong separation between kind of these relations between humans and these post-socialist changes in environment, and sometimes it includes also our relations even with things, objects like non-living things, and at the same time also really how our relationship with nature has been changed. For example, there's Lithuanian artist Aurelija Maknytė, who is working in the exhibition, will discuss the impact of beavers in the landscapes, and that there's this almost like constant fighting between humans and beavers, but in the context, there is also that this during the Soviet times, the melioration system had very aggressively changed the landscapes and the nature, and in a way that beavers are fighting with humans. They're actually trying to bring this what you could call the natural ecosystem back. Or, for example, another work in is by Ukrainian artist Olya Mikhailuk, and it is of course the very kind of essential aspect why we included in the exhibition is the current war in Ukraine. But her work talks about the war which started in 2014 in Donbass. But she talks about this war and unwounds through actually nature and human relation with nature, the landscapes again in the region where people are coming from, or where they're having these battles. And for example, this at the very center of her work is the plant mint, and there's this association that mint is language-wise in Ukrainian language, mint contains the word memory, and the mint, as she makes this very, in a way, kind of literal but also poetic connection that mints are the plants which are growing are as apparently invasive species. They when everything is destroyed, the mints are still growing, and this kind of this association or metaphor that the life continues, the life can be renewed, and at the same time, mint as something that keeps you kind of sane when drinking the mint tea. You kind of try to still kind of find some connection with reality outside the war. And a lot of other works in the exhibition where there's actually through human relation with nature. It also talks about this interconnectedness in many layers and kind of tiniest details, which are connecting not just like humans with nature or humans as humans, but it's in a way the ideas of Neimanis' book are very much actually suggesting even more sensitive reading of the exhibition. So yeah. It was a very timely moment to read the book or to read it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was actually thinking, thank you for those examples that in the Ukrainian war, when in the Black Sea, there are like sea life are dying because it's so polluted, and mostly we pay attention to human tragedy, but there is so much happening to nature, and especially in this angle of water. So that is really, if this artist is bringing attention to that is really very valuable. You asked about the influence of this book. Well, I wouldn't say that it is kind of the book. Before there were maybe a larger concept of transcorporeality, and by Stacey Alaimo, who is a literary scholar, and she uses literary works in her analysis, and also to sort of exercise or apply this concept of transcorporeality that she developed. And then Neimanis, she took it more into maybe a narrower domain of water, but I think it is even more striking because this transcorporeal connection with the outside and with each other, where Alaimo says that our bodies are porous, they are not closed systems, but we are open to the influences on the elemental level of, we exchange elements, viruses, particles, whatever, with the others, human, non-human, the environment. This was already there, and water maybe is the most striking example. It makes it really somehow very tangible and clear that we understand that water inside of us that is connected with the different versions of water outside. But I would say that if we think of literary criticism, if water has been used as a metaphor a lot in novels, in films, as I said, but more as a metaphor. So it's interesting that when Joonas, you said that into anthropology, which used to be kind of more concrete, metaphor came, then I would say that in literary criticism, it's vice versa. Metaphors are traditionally used in literature as figures, figures of language. But there is such a term as literalization of metaphor. When we say, for example, he stole my heart, but in one novel, there is somebody who literally steals the heart. So here also there is kind of rain, like in Hemingway's A Farewell to Arm, the main character is in depression and it's raining. So it sort of reflects the character's moods. But then in those more contemporary posthuman books and in the theories like that of Neimanis, we can see that metaphor turns into something material. So it's interesting how in the different disciplines, this movement is sort of in the opposite directions. So that is really enriching when we bring our disciplines together to compare how it happens. I don't know, that would be probably my idea, but maybe Ella Marie has something to add there from the point of view of literature.
Thank you very much for this discussion. My background is literature, and it's more like a comment. I have been thinking of one Estonian novel for a while. It's by Leida Kibovits. It's in Estonian Soomustüdruk, and I think it translates something like armored girl or girl with armor. And it's about a girl who grows up by the river Emajõgi in the beginning of the 20th century in Tartu. And I want to write something about it, but up to today, I did not have the idea, but I haven't read the book yet, but already our discussion gave so many, I would say, framing ideas for that book, because it brings forward the way how the river was part of the life of the people living by the riverside in the beginning of the 20th century, and how poor is our world now when we just pass the river or use it sometimes for swimming or going by boat. But they literally earned living, they depended on the river. It was a waterway to be used, and it was also dangerous. And so I think all the things you were talking about, it added so much to this book. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What's also, I think, interesting with water, if we start to think about beyond this book, is how it really brings together maybe different disciplines and interests. For example, many artists, I believe, have found also water as one way how to enter into the field of science and speak about also environmental change today, but also in the future. Just a few years ago, at Tallinn Kai Art Center was Shehzad Dawood's exhibition about Baltic Sea, where he attempted to bring together scientists and artists to think how would Baltic Sea would look like in 100 years. And what came out from this expedition, but also from the discussions between scientists and artists, is that frankly, we don't really know about the water. We don't really know about the Baltic Sea. We don't know about the future here. And that, I believe, is a good characteristic for water. Often on surface, it looks really tangible. It looks touchable, understandable. But once we go beyond metaphors, beyond the material part of water, then it becomes really intangible and hard to know, hard to understand. And there are so many different ways how to perceive, how to know about water, which I believe allows us to become really productive on interdisciplinary work. So here again, I believe this book helps us to really think about sort of like about this maybe then posthuman science or posthuman way how to make science. It really brings together really different ideas. I don't know, how do you feel about this idea that really we don't really know about water, or it is intangible and but not that much tangible as maybe been put in this book?
I think, at least for me, how I was reading it, it's a bit my reading was a bit different, or somehow that she is actually, of course, the water, it's like on a planetary scale, it's also like the biggest part of the globe is covered by water, and of course we don't know, it's a world which is has its own ecosystem, and there's so many things which we still don't know about water. But exactly the perspective of Neimanis is that she actually talks about these waters which we know, but we maybe don't think about it as either as water or as this kind of part of our these commands. And for example, there's especially in the last chapter, she talks about this aspect of pet bottles, that we constantly consume water from the kind of bought in the shop, and which is filled in the pet bottles. But and of course it's a question of recycling, question of pollution, and this plastic micro elements which are also polluting our environment. And there is this some sort of actually absurdity that what we could call the global north. There's actually we have the water, but there's still this kind of this reframing of it, and how it is how our relationship with water is almost like in a way kind of alienated or somehow reframed because of this capitalist system. And at the same time, for example, when there's charity organizations which are still sometimes part of this big enterprises who actually make their capital out of these commons, like for example bottled water, how they actually use the imagery or somehow this our also but for example she talks about this usually very rhetorical images with little children who are starving or who even don't have access to the water, and at the same time there's a lot of hypocrisy also in those relations between how these images are used, or how what kind of elementary part is of these imageries in this common concept. So she's what for me it's more like that she kind of re-questions that is waterly relations which we actually don't question, which she's not going to these areas which are not known, but more like the ones which are in front of our nose, but we don't kind of think about them as part of the environmental or these human post-human relations. And like talking about because like especially for me in this last chapter she became very political. And when Julia, you mentioned that water is so much used in also like in literature, in films, in all this cultural milieu, then unfortunately I can't remember the kind of detailed plot, but there was just the series of James Bond that it was like in the 70s, and when this series started, it was usually about this kind of the Bond is saving the planet from the really kind of huge disasters, which is like that. And then in the very maybe it was one of the definitely not among the very last series, but last kind of episode, but there was this kind of banality of the world that he was actually trying to say this. There was somehow about this the kind of the company which was trying to make its profit from kind of monopolizing the water supply system. And this is kind of, again, like it's someone, I just remember this example just because there was this saying that, oh, it's or kind of in the reviews, the reflection that, oh, it's really become really sad that even James Bond, from this really huge kind of narratives, has become so banal. But it's like, I think it's actually very it's a wonderful shift in James Bond series, that it's actually this supply of the water. It is as, I don't know, as important as, war catastrophes or somehow it's not kind of banal. It is such a big important part if you think about this environmental concerns and ecological concerns in our reality, which we simply maybe don't notice, but it's there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I don't know how much it is connected to this the topic or that example. Just as we were talking about this bottled water and this sort of mismatch between our ideas of what water is, and there is recently a film, a Polish film on Netflix called High Water. It's a series actually about the flood in Wrocław in Poland in the late 90s, when the river kind of, because there were factories built where they were not supposed to be, and nobody listened to the scientists who had preventive measures. So the whole city was flooded and many people died. It's a historical episode, and now there is a new series about that. And it was like thinking in cinematic terms. There were people being warned, or there were rumors that the city is going to be flooded. So there were scenes with this huge panoramic images of the river, like getting bigger and bigger and more dangerous, and people going with to get water supplies, like carrying huge cans of water so that they could have something to drink at home while being stuck there on the upper floors where they were going to take refuge from water. So it's kind of, you're trying to save yourself from this element coming as that is dangerous and deadly, and with the same substance, so to speak. So from the point of view of water philosophy, that was really striking. And there were those scenes were really powerful, with close-ups on the water cans that they're sort of carrying with them as, bringer of life and taker of life. So that is, what came to my mind as an example. Iveta is actually a PhD student. So you were wondering whether the students are going to be there. We have one.
Yeah, I just wanted to, it's like a comment probably, and it's probably also a reference to Joonas's question that was asked previously about this fact that the moment when we try to dig deeper, it's impossible to comprehend water anymore. Like, it's impossible to understand what's there and to fight it. And also Julia has mentioned this paradox. And I was thinking, when you were reading this book, have you thought of the idea that it's not paradox, but it's actually very logical in a way, that if we will bring again the example of mother and child, how mother gives birth and there is this umbilical cord that you have to cut. And then the child, who was always in a liquid most of the time, finally can start breathing, the lungs are working again. So it's the same what happened to creatures when they came out of water and they finally were separating from water. So it feels like water gave us birth, and then it decided to give us our own life, to make this boundary between us so we can be independent in a way, but still we consist of water. So it's like water becomes a language, in a way of communication. So it's there, it's separate from us, but it's still inside of us to give us some kind of information about nature's concerns. So when you mentioned that the milk is poison, that means that something is wrong. So I think that nature tries to communicate like this, and not in the best way, of course. And then we feel like nature is dangerous and evil, but it's not. I think this is us again who are causing those atrocities, and then we're demolishing nature. Nature is trying to communicate this way, and that's why probably this paradox of people also trying to survive and bring those cans of water when actual water is trying to kill us. Probably it's not paradox, it's just a logical way of how nature reacts, and how it gives us a hint that something is going wrong, that you're not dealing with nature in the best way, not in an ethical way. It's just like a thought, maybe. Did you have anything similar in your mind when you were reading, or maybe you had some other interesting interpretations of this paradox of water?
No, I agree. I think it's very good. As you said, that water that remains in our bodies is a kind of language. I would maybe develop it that it is a kind of memory, this sort of physical or material memory, that really it's we are separate, but we are together. And yeah, I think you expressed it very well. And really, she, the author of the book, goes through many examples of both, that it's this moment of development of the creatures evolutionarily in the process of evolution, and also in the fetus developing in the mother's body is the same logic. So yeah, that memory is retained. I don't know if you had the same feelings or can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly what you this aspect of memory. I think it's really. I don't think she talks about it very much in her book, like using the word memory, but I think it is very much part of the overall reflection, and especially like this again, like just referring to my practice in dealing with making exhibitions and artworks. This concept of body memory, it is I think very, how to say, fruitful when we think about different forms, how we consciously or very often unconsciously deal with our environment. And exactly like when she talks about bodies of water, it's already like, for me, this term already actually includes this embodied memory as well. And she, I think, very, very nicely in her book also connects through these different examples. And for example, also when she refers to this in the indigenous context, it's so much related to this memory, which we don't remember like with our minds, but exactly with the body.
I believe this is maybe a good moment to wrap this discussion up. I believe this book really invites to read it carefully and slowly. Maybe it's really a fascinating way how to think about not only about water, but our relationship with other non-humans, how we are all related in this world. Thankfully, the publisher Bloomsbury has made the book openly available. Everyone can download the whole book for free. So we have that chance to read. And for some, those who work in Tallinn University, we should have a reading week. So if we haven't read it yet, then maybe let's do it. I thank you, Ieva, Julia, also Ella-Marie and Iveta for comments, for your discussion, and we hope to see you in live soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.